I feel a sort of measure of weird gratitude and almost guilt for how much I love my current life sometimes because
Hmm.
I live with 4 roommates, people in their late 20s, early 30s, like sorority/WeWork slash WeWork experience in a city full of weirdos. I can have like a creative conversation with anybody anywhere because I'm in LA. It's just a bunch of people like me who are on the Don
Don
Quixote type
Quixote,
like
yeah.
journeys where like you have no idea where you're going exactly. And I feel so blessed to be in this strange wilderness with all of these other weary travelers. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. And I think I'm meant to be here. And it is extremely joyous. Even in the moments of like desert or desolation, like it feels like everything's dead, like the tree has no leaves on it. I'm struck by the beauty of nothing and like what else there is underneath nothing.
Everybody, welcome to The Soloists. My name is Diana Brown. I'm here with my friend and co host, Mallory Everton. And today we're joined by our new friend, Kylee Shields, who is a therapist and the host of the Belonging Place podcast. And Kylee, we're so excited to talk to you. I'm curious just to start, what made you, interested in the Soloist
Yeah.
project?
So I went to Restore for the first time last year, and you guys had a big wall that you were asking people to put post-it notes up. I think I was like the third, fourth, and fifth post-it note. Because I put three, and my whole soul was like, I had this tug and pull you guys might have. I was like, but nobody's talking about being Mormon and single. And I would say my second thing is I always wanted somebody who was a little bit ahead of me, maybe 5 or 10 years
Yeah.
ahead of me, that was a little more vocal. So I started doing it. I wrote a book about being single, and then I was blogging about my adventures in Boston.
Yeah.
We're often missing admirable mentors in this space. I was in the film program at BYU, and my professors were some of my first mentors that were both very invested in media and art and pop culture, but also extremely faithful. And so they presented me with an idea that for the first time, like, oh, I could be really invested in popular media and
Hmm.
also still because I hadn't really seen that before in my community in Portland where I grew up. It was either one or the other. And then obviously the mentors that we do have that have children and they show us this is what you do when your kids move out of the house. This is
Hmm.
what you do when your kids start taking care of you. This is how your whole life could look. We don't have things like that. And of course it's terrifying. It makes so much sense that we would be terrified.
I think like most things in life, the outliers they're a lot louder, right? So we also have a
Right.
lot of people who are single who have left the church because their story is this: I didn't belong and I
Mhm.
didn't have a framework. I just
Mm.
fight that tooth and nail. It's like nobody's responsibility to build the framework in your life but you. If you see something missing, you can build it. And instead of
Mm.
saying, well, the church didn't do it or I didn't fit.
I would love to hear a little bit more about like your personal history and where you came to some of these conclusions.
I grew up in Oregon, Portland. So that gives you a backdrop. I love the Pacific Northwest, not very many Mormons, right? And for the most part, my friends were like, because everyone's in track. It's like track and field is the thing in Oregon.
Nike,
And
baby.
and I was a runner like everybody else. And pretty much people just knew I didn't drink coffee and I didn't have sex. These are like the two things. And so I never got invited to parties where people were drinking. And I never really got invited to parties where people were doing this. I had a buffer because my friends were like, she doesn't do that. Fast forward a couple years, we ended up moving to Utah. I started to realize something different. I started to look around kind of at the girls that were my age, and I started to realize I wasn't worried about the things that they were worried about. I wasn't worried about how I looked very much, and I wasn't really worried about dating, and I wasn't really worried about what people thought of me. I think I had a stronger testimony than most people about grace. Like,
Mm.
I just was like, this is what religion is. It's grace. No, I didn't have scrupulosity like a lot of people we hear that just like, were like, I have to read my scriptures. I've always struggled with being really good at reading my scriptures or really good at praying or really good at, but I was tethered to like heavenly parents and a source. That meant that I didn't have a lot of this noise, food noise, clothes noise, friend noise. I had a lot of space in my brain and my heart to make friends with all kinds of different people and all kinds of different things. I wasn't super stressed to graduate from BYU single. I think there were a lot of people that were. So I didn't feel the stress because of my mission, I graduated at 24. So I didn't start to feel the stress until I moved to Boston and I was 26 and single. And all of a sudden, I was like, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, and I don't have a person, and I'm not a mom. Sort of had this midlife crisis at 26.
Yep.
You guys are shaking your head. You
Yeah.
relate?
I feel like that's 26 among Latter-day Saints is like
Is this your
32
guys' age?
among,
I'm
I don't know.
curious. If you
It's
were
like,
to
what's
put a
Totally,
happening?
number,
Diana.
if
Over.
you were to put a number on your age, I'm curious. What, like, do you guys have
When
a
you started
number?
when we started to panic or when we
Yeah.
started to
Or just
feel
even started to be like, I did not think that this would be my life. Yeah. Is there an age?
I remember distinctly coming back from a trip with this guy I was dating at the time when I had just turned 28, and it was, like, quite clear during the trip. We'd gone with friends to the Middle East. On the trip, I was like, "Yeah, this isn't gonna work," and I remember just, like, driving around after that trip in this kinda jet-lagged state. I probably shouldn't have been driving and just being like, "Oh, I'm getting old." Like, I'd obviously worried about it a little bit before, but, like,
Right,
I
right,
think
right,
that was
right.
the moment I was like, "What if this doesn't happen?" I think 29 was my worst year. It also coincided with the pandemic, and 29 and 30, I think, were absolutely the worst. And then it gets more
Yeah.
complicated because, like, as each year passes, it's technically, like, more dire, but I also think my reserves has slowly gotten steadier to meet that
I think yeah, I have some mitigating factors that I think affected things for a little while. 26 is like I was 25, 26 when I moved to Salt Lake City. And I think that was a shift for me because I started realizing like Provo was like toxic air for me. I was like, I
Mm.
can't live in Provo anymore because I am like 300 years older than all of these young moms in Macy's or whatever at the grocery store. And so I know that that's when I
Because
started
25 is
to feel
45. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, genuinely, the way people talk about it, when it's so normal to be married with a baby at 22, you do start to feel very strange. And I felt this relaxation when I lived in the avenues, and my next door neighbor was like a single 50-year-old professor. I had gay neighbors, and I was just like, oh, okay, life diversity exists, and I'm not as strange as I think I am. So that's when I started having the quiet panic. But
Yeah.
the true like apocalypse happened for me when I was 31, 32, probably. And I think it was because through all those late 20s years, I was extremely industrious and very, very busy. And I just worked I felt very called to my work and very purposeful during that time, and so I don't think a lot of the sort of shames and concerns that I really had that were just limiting beliefs and honestly just ugly thoughts that I was having, I don't think they were being a sort of I was shoving them down with ambitious sort of what can I accomplish energy, like if I just make a movie, if I just do another web series, if I can
But
just never
if
stop
I
being impressive to
produce,
other
then
people.
I am good. If I can
Well,
produce,
exactly. And that must mean nothing is wrong with me. I think I was just in absolute anxious, like, I have to prove to myself, probably more than anybody, but obviously to the entire world as much as possible, that I'm not unlovable, and that's not why
Hmm.
I'm single. And then 31, 32 hits post-pandemic. Is like right around pandemic, post-pandemic, so I'm with you, Diana, and it was like, "You don't have anything." Like, you're not impressing anybody, and you're not hiding anymore.
so when I became
Mm.
26 and I was in Boston and I watched girls specifically that were like waiting around to get married. And their message they were saying, listen, I don't care how you look and I don't care where you work. But if your message internally that you're saying is I'm waiting around to get onto the story that the church or whatever is telling me that to get married. And I was just like really put off by that. I was
Mm.
really like, I refuse to have a muted story, I guess is what I would say. I want to live bold, big, brash, I want to be, sometimes I talk to people like, I want to be an elephant. I don't want to be a mouse. And if that means that I'm going to be single for the rest of my life because of it, I think I chose at like 26 that that was going to be my story. And I know this is a long answer, but I like decided that I was like, I am not going to live for somebody else or some other story or some perceived notion. I will do everything in my power to get what my righteous desire is to get married and have kids. I'm going to always leave a little open wound, a little hole, a little vulnerability, a little hoping, a little like hurt, a little bit like get on the apps for 3 months and then off the apps for 3 months. Be open to setups, but I'm not going to be a gaping, wounding hole. And I'm going to say good because I had built a really good belonging place. I had really good friends. I was really close to my family. I had invested in my hobbies. I was growing myself in my interests. I was curious. I was reading. I had filled my life with so many things that weren't just the story that was being told in my religious or my social um, surroundings. I'm gonna stop 'cause there's more, but I'm gonna
That's
Well,
beautiful. Thank you.
I love that you've been asking those questions and finding ways to create spaces for yourself and for others for all these years. I do just want to say one thing about the church stuff. I think
Mm.
that if we were going to try and unpack something together about the note we might give the church or the church culture, I think it would be, and this is based on a previous conversation that we all had, but the idea that the church has sidelined conversations that about the single happy person, or in other words, we have failed to consecrate the single path, like to be allowed to consecrate the single path. And I think people feel like a genuine resistance and reticence to being able to say that could be an option for me, that would be beautiful. And instead I feel like sometimes the conversation feels like, well, we shouldn't condone that, which of
Mm,
course is like, this is my best guess, and I would love to hear both of
yeah.
your thoughts on this, but my best guess is that, like, if we were to say, "Look at Mallory over there, you could have a life like hers," then I would somehow be dissuading people from getting married and having children, and then that would be bad. So, in order to continue to encourage people to have children and, of course, build the kingdom in that way and to build families, and which we know, like, we all believe in the family. We all do. I hope that goes without saying. But that means that my life needs to be something that people wouldn't want. And I'm hoping that we can continue to have this conversation and figure out how we could bless all
Oh my
lives,
gosh, can we be
you know?
disruptors? I wanna be a disruptor in the industry. I'm
Yes,
raising
let's
my hand.
go. What else am I gonna do?
So Diana, I'm curious about your thought on that because then I would love to speak to that, but yeah, do you have thoughts about that?
The thing for me is it's just such a fallacy.
Mm,
Um,
Mhm.
I don't know very many people who, given the spectrum between like, okay, you could be a happy single person or you could be a happy married person. I don't know that many people who are like, oh, I'd love to be the happy single person. I think most people have a deep desire for partnership and real love.
Mm.
I do think if there's just like trying to play the devil's advocate, I think that there's decisions you can make when you're quite young that maybe set you up for one life or the other, and like just helping people think through those critically, like, hey, if you, I don't know, this life path will probably go this direction. And I think there's some practical things like that that sometimes people don't consider.
Sure.
I'm trying to think of an example like that. But overall, I think it's that whole thing is based on a fallacy that if you depict people as happy as a single person, that they'll like vie for that. I think if there were some message I could channel is just like, hey, partnering is actually so much more complicated than anybody gives it credit for.
Mhm.
Let's get really freaking curious about what's going on there and what's breaking down and why this isn't as automatic a sort of jump point than but I don't think it's because people don't want partnership. I think there's much more intricate interesting sociological questions going on and we should tackle those. You know what I mean?
I think that the church and lots of places in media, there's like an all or nothing. There's not a dichotomy. So like even with the church with marriage and kids, like we know, and I literally know for 17 years of sitting with families that the underside or the and of a marriage, there are lots of people in marriages that are lonely. There are lots of
Mhm.
mothers and fathers who've had kids and love their kids, but do not love being a parent and cannot say that and don't love certain parts of their lives. They get to certain stages and they're like relieved because they're like, oh, I hated that part. And we do not talk enough about that. That to me is the stuff. That is the life.
Yeah.
That is where you are baked and cooked and where you become resilient. Where I think we have a problem when we say, like, we're afraid to say that people are single and happy is because we are unwilling to let them share their whole dichotomy. This place you guys just gave me where I can say how happy and how much I built the kingdom and how sad and
Yes.
intensely like full of grief. It's just we don't do it. We don't do it. We don't have books about, I really
Mhm.
mean I want to be a disruptor because if you do an ad and you're like, this person is single and happy, what was the cost of that?
Yeah.
There's a cost for that, right? Just like
Yeah.
the cost for
Happiness always takes a
just like
cost.
there's a cost for
Yes.
being married and happy, right? I think the church is afraid to say it's okay to be happy because they know that there are singles that are sort of not building the kingdom. They're not invested in their growth or resilience. There's a lot of people that sort of have this eat, drink, and be merry, even in the church, that are just like, I'm me, so I can spend my money on trips and vacations, and I don't really need to serve and I don't really need to give. I'm not saying there's a lot, but I'm saying there is a story that is being told for the good or the bad that if we say it's okay to be single, then you no longer are living your covenants or your promises, which are to mourn with those that mourn, to serve those that serve, that you're sort of out here untethered doing your own thing. Now, we know even if you wanted, you couldn't do that. Like, because our deep
Sure.
desire is to be in a partnership and a family. So, you know, but I think there is this fallacy story. We can't blow wind in those sails because that goes against digging in and building. When you're in a family, you have to dig in, you have to build, you have to serve. Your body as a mother is, they eat from you, you're birthed from them, right? So I don't know if you guys feel the same, but I think this is where some of the fear comes about saying like it's okay to be single, because I think there's a fear that then there's an absence of something.
Mhm. I'm so delighted with both of your answers. I just find this
Yeah.
so rich because it obviously is complicated. It can't just be like, we need to represent a happy life. What I hear and what you're saying, Kylie, is that and what you were saying, Diana, is that we need to represent more sides of maybe both or all realities, however you want to look at it.
People
That
are
like
so
this,
attracted to the, yeah, to the underbelly, to the hard stuff. We know the more vulnerable you are,
yes.
the more people are connected. I would love the church to shift the sheen. Like,
Shift the
I
The
sheen.
I'm
Yeah.
single, I'm gay, I'm divorced, I'm a single
Mhm.
mom, I'm married, I'm widowed, it's just like I'm a Mormoness, I'm all these things, and not one or the other is more better or more. And if I can't get what I think that I want here, how do I create it? The thing I know that has brought me the most happiness in my life is to activate my agency.
Mhm.
Mhm.
There you go. And I think that we can forget that that is really the purpose of the church, like, and of
1000%.
everything. I've been on a little Western excursion. I normally live on the East Coast, but I came across the plains, literally, on Amtrak, uh, a
I
couple
love
weeks
trains
ago.
so much. I love that you were on a train.
I literally came across the plains straight through Iowa, Nebraska. Anyway, I just that phrase just came to mind. I didn't plan to say that.
I love it. I love
I
But,
it.
love it.
I stopped for a couple of days in Iowa and rented a car and drove around, and I found out there's this whole transcendental meditation commune, and then, like, I saw that they had these meetings with these Ayurvedic specialists, and I was like, "I'm gonna get a consultation while I'm there." I've always wondered what my Ayurvedic, like, health type is, because like, they kind of type your body and then have different diet recommendations for it, and so I met with this dude and he was like, "You don't sleep well." I'm like, "Yeah, that's true."
Mhm.
And I'm moody sometimes. And this guy, he was like, "It's really not so complicated. First of all, stop labeling yourself. Like, take responsibility. Every time you talked about yourself that way, like you're telling a story, and you need to stop that." And then he was like, "You need to meditate and you need to read the Bhagavad Gita every night." And he was like, "That is," and then this is what was interesting. He was like, "That is true
Love
yoga."
this.
He's like, "Yoga
Mhm.
isn't this stretching exercise. Yoga is something in your mind. It is doing the tricks every morning, every day to remember that you can move in the world the way that you
Yeah.
like want to." And I just I guess like and I, and none of this is really new. I think this is what the gospel teaches too. But it's just so interesting that it feels like sometimes it really is so simple that like life is always wanting to cloud the fact of our agency. It's
Mm.
always wanting to cloud it and just say, no, you can't actually choose freedom or joy. You can't actually do these things because of all of these reasons. And I was talking about this with a friend a couple nights ago who's like, okay, but Diana, you can look at stats and it'll show that married people are happy or whatever. Like, what do you say to that? And it's like, yeah, you can put all sorts of things up there to cloud. And I'm not wanting to make it sound like there's nothing in the world that affects us, but it just sometimes it does feel like it really comes down to that super simple question of like, what stories am I telling me that block my freedom and my
Yeah, and
ability to move in the
can I read you guys my favorite quote about this? It comes
Sure.
from, Harry Emerson Fosdick. It comes from the 12, uh, Tests of Character. Quote, "Some Christians carry their religion on their backs. It is a packet of beliefs and practices which they must bear. At times it grows heavy and they would willingly lay it down, but that would mean a break in old traditions, so they shoulder it again. But real Christians do not carry their religion carries them. It is not weight, it is wings. It lifts them up, it sees them over hard places, it makes the universe seem friendly, life purposeful, hope real, sacrifice worthwhile. It sets them free from fear, futility, discouragement, and sin, the great enslavers of men's souls. You can know a real Christian when you see him by his buoyancy."
Mm.
And I think that one of the things I chose a long time ago was that my religion was going to give me wings and it was not going to give me weights. I'll give you guys one example. I'm 26. I'm sitting with a friend of mine, a guy friend of mine. We're in the car and he is absolutely having what I would call okay, but a temper tantrum about the law of chastity. He's a 26-year-old man who's never had sex. And he is just, I'm giving him space, but he is just venting. Why would a religion make me, who's supposed to, and this is healthy, not have sex? And like it is a weight around him, and I feel it. And he is just wrestling, and I'm sitting next to him, and he's just having an out of body. And guys, I have empathy for this, so I'm not making fun of him when I'm saying this, but he is just like, and why would God do that to us? And every word out of his mouth is that the law of chastity is a punishment and a weight. And it
Mm.
was
Right.
really eye opening and life opening because I'm also 26. This is my time when and I have had and continue to have and did have an absolutely otherworldly experience next to him. Not that I didn't want to have sex and not that I didn't have sexual urges and not that I didn't say like this is so natural and it's kind of weird the older I get the weirder it got. But I looked at him
Sure.
and I was like, dude, have you ever made the choice to live the law of chastity? Like made the choice?
Mm.
Or did you just like live your life into it and God and you went on a mission? And he had never been asked that. His eyes got so big, he started crying and he's like, no one's ever talked to me about the law of chastity that I had to make the choice back. I did the thing. And I was like, dude, you can go have sex with anybody you want. Go right now. You're free.
Yeah.
No, the church doesn't tell you you
Mm.
can't. Like, there are consequences, there are choices. But I looked at him and in telling him that, the story I told myself was, you don't get to choose the covenant and live it and know the blessings of it and then like be a victim of it. Like, so I
Mm.
constantly have to tell myself it's a choice. And when my sister who's left the church is like, the church has taken sexuality away from you, I say, no, that is not true. I have tons of sexuality. I have all kinds of things. I have my own libido. I talk about it with people, and I made a choice. And that is my choice. And I until if it stops being my choice, I need to stop living the law of chastity. It can't be put on me. It can't be a weight. Now, I think there are a lot of people that take their choices and they wander through the world like these are things that are burdens that I have to carry that keep me away from people or keep me away from joys of life. And I think that this is one of the saddest things. I would invite people to be like, we've got to have a different relationship with our covenants, with our choices.
Oh, it reminds me of one of my favorite David O. McKay quotes. He says, it's on my wall here, so I'm going to read it. Next to the bestowal of life itself, the right to direct that life is God's greatest gift to us. And I
I want that.
think,
Mallory, will you take a picture of that for me? I want that.
yeah, I will.
Or send me
Um,
the
it's our responsibility, actually. We've been given life. What a gift. And the right to direct that life is our greatest gift. Our brand of Christianity as Mormons is so hyped about agency, and I think that's really cool because that is like it's all wrapped up in what you were saying in that story. Absolutely up to you, 1000% your choice. In fact, God really wants you to make that choice from somewhere deep within. It's the only way that you'll know God. It's the only way that God can show you yourself and show you life for real. And until we're willing to do that, sometimes it's very easy to choose victim mode because we get to blame everybody else and we get to feel morally superior on some ground like I'm trapped. I've been here. That's why I sometimes am here still. That's why I know it
Amen.
so well. And I know the relief of being able to step into my agency again and say, well, maybe it's important that I make a choice here. Maybe it's important that I be honest here, so that God could actually help me with my truth instead of with this, like, well, sorry, God, oh, my hands are tied. No, they're not. No, they're not. You're alive. So they're not. I think feel heard stories like the one you described with a friend and anecdotes from other people in my life who've had their various travails through this whole interesting territory. And one of the things that I think is most freeing and most empowering of agency is to clear out the true negative judgments and honestly just fallacies about what sex really is, about what relationships really are for, what sex is really for, and what it means to be a whole person, what it means to be a sexual person. And there's just so much damage done by sex being some kind of badge of honor or something that makes you like cool. When sometimes the most grounding and helpful things for me are things like a couple years ago, I've mentioned this group more than once, but I became super, super interested in this therapy group called Mental Health, and they release all these free webinars for people who are struggling with chronic illness or are on hospice or are nurses or doctors helping with people at the end of their lives. And their conversations about sexuality, those are brilliant and beautiful
Mhm.
because if you can imagine, we're talking people all states of mental, emotional, and physical health and ability to connect and to be able to take sex as just like a specific genital act and say, well, these two people don't have that option because this person is on chemotherapy and is very, very sick and near the end of their life. So perhaps just holding hands could be really nice again. Like, I cried when I listened to it because I was like, it's so easy to forget what we're really doing and to think like, "Oh, what am I allowed to do? What is right and what is wrong and what's normal and what's unfair?" And it's like, yeah, but actually what's in front of you and
Mm.
how best do you feel called to love who is in front of you? And so often I think it's easy to be like trying to figure out all of these like heady ideas when actually what we're called to do is to properly love each other. And that is more complex than just what we call sex. It's too small. It's not enough.
I love this. One time I was talking about it and I must have been kind of talking about it like I was embarrassed or something. And it was really powerful. I was actually there was a guy I was on a plane with. He wasn't a member and he found out I was a member and at the time I was I think 32 and he was like 21. It was at first a really embarrassing conversation because he was like, "Is it true that like Mormons don't have sex or whatever?" And I was like, "Yeah, like before marriage." And then he started asking personal questions and he was like, "Well, have you never had sex?" And I was really caught off guard because I even though I can talk about this sometimes, I was just like embarrassed. I was flushed. I was like, I didn't want to sit in the seat anymore. And I was like, "Yeah." And he stopped and not even in a fakey like, he's like, I don't think I've ever met somebody who has that much self-control or that much self-determination. And and then we started talking a few more things and I started being embarrassed about those things. And then as he left the plane, he said, "I don't know what this is about because I'm not a religious person, whatever, but I feel to tell you that you should never be embarrassed about the decisions you've made in your life." He was, by the way, also drunk. Made the
The
whole thing
spirit
weird.
talks to drunk
But
people.
he left and I bawled my eyes out in that because the roller coaster of emotions that I
Oh,
felt
yeah.
sitting next to him, the shame that I felt for being a virgin when he
Mhm.
was just like and the like trying to be cool by like, yeah, the choices
Yeah.
and then the flatulation that I felt for shaming myself for making a choice that was a good choice. and then not knowing if I was safe or not safe with him, and then knowing that the spirit that he didn't even know what to like call it, like came to him to tell me, like, you're good. I just think like more of that, right? We need a little bit more of that, but that takes people being able to put their head out and potentially get it lopped off, right? That experience I would never have chosen, but I'm so grateful for it. It was something that I didn't know that I needed, right? Was for somebody to
Yeah,
sit over there and not see me as othered or weird, but to see me as valuable and important, you know,
that's
because
so
there's
beautiful.
Yeah.
Another thing that you said that really struck me in some of our prior conversations was just how much you relate to the term like the soloist because, there's a single component, but then you're also one of the only like active members in your family. And like just that there's like multiple components of just standing on your own and living life in a language that people around you don't understand. I think when it comes to this sex question, single in their 30s from the church, like it just goes so many different directions. And we also don't want to like create shame for people who are like, you know what, I actually haven't been choosing this. I feel like I've been
literally,
forced and
yeah.
locked into this. And, even the Amish have like a Rumspringa phase in part because there's a sense of like, hey, sometimes you do need to step back from the culture, the thing that you were given to be able to actively choose it. And you've been talking so powerfully about that. But I just think that's something that deserves to be named that a lot of people
Mhm.
really struggle to feel that sense of choice
Yeah.
in our church. And they might go through a period where they're like, you know what, I actually don't want to choose this and I'm going to do something else, for so many reasons. And I know people who have like met wonderful men outside the church who are like, I think you're great, but you know what? It actually kind of is a deal breaker for me. I need to know I'm sexually compatible with somebody before. And they make that brave choice.
Some of my most humbling spaces is when I've sat with some of my friends that did serve missions and then did choose to have sex. And then I didn't. And we're sitting in there and having really, really sacred conversations. I had one of my friends say, I was like, maybe I should just try it and go. And she looked right at me and she said, I just like, can you not say that? And can you stand and stay in the place that you're in? And I know you. And she reflected back to me and she also was able to hear me say, like, nothing has changed in my relationship with you, and nothing has changed in your relationship with God. And you can be where you are and you can change and you can be somewhere else. And wow, how cool is that? This is one of those. One of the things I love about the name of the soloist and the thing is as a singer, like usually if you're a soloist, you have to have an accompanist or you have a choir, you're doing a thing, there's something behind you, but you get to shine, you get to have your moment, you get to like do the thing. I think this is my favorite part about being single is that I never chose it, I never picked it up, I never wanted to put it on and try it on, I lived into it. But boy, do I want to, like, if this is the coat that I'm gonna wear, like,
Mm.
do it in style. Like, I mean, I'm joking, but if this is the thing that I'm gonna do, I am going to do it with flair and zhuzh it up, and I'm going to constantly grieve when I'm losing while I'm doing it. I would like to have a partner. I would like to have kids. My womb is closing. I'm gonna cry. I'm gonna grieve. I'm going to absolutely fall apart when I realize that, like, I will in this life not be able to do that thing that so many women do, which is like birth a child. And like, how empowering is that? And I had to look at that and I had to like love it and grieve it and set it aside and be like, that is closed in my life. And then I had to be like, and what do I do with that? Because it's easy to just be like, well, I'm moving on. And I'm like, no, that is such a loss. That is such a loss. And I can sit and say it is. And I can just marinate a little bit in that grief. And then I can sit. I do my own things when I'm grieving, and then I can be like, okay, this means your choices have changed. You're not going to be able to date people who want to still have kids. That's easy. Boom, they're out of the picture. And I sort of have a make it happen like attitude that's like, these are the circumstances I now have. When I was single, I want to date single. When I was a little bit older, I was like, oh, I can date somebody divorced. Then I was like, I don't really want to date anybody single. I want to date people who are divorced because they have this experience. And then it was like, oh, now I want to date somebody who's been married because I want them to want marriage and I want them to have that experience. And I want to date somebody who's divorced or widowed because I want to be a mom. I don't know, down the line, I think that I will want to marry somebody who's a grandma or a grandfather because I will be grandma age and I will want to be a grandma. Like, this is my hope, is that at every stage of my life, I won't stop wanting the thing that I want, but I will figure out, and messy. I would never say I'm doing it gracefully, but I will sort of like see the thing and want it and wish it and pray it and do what I can. And then I will set it aside. It doesn't really go away. It's a little bit like pain is like acute, and then you move it away and it's sort of in the periphery, like over here, right? I don't think we ever let go of the fact that I didn't get married younger, I didn't have kids younger, or now I'm not going to have. I just don't believe in this thing that we tell people. I think it sits around us and with us, but it becomes the best parts of us, right? I have more empathy for people who have infertility or people who haven't got married, who haven't had kids, because I have sat where they've sat. I have felt that grief, right? And I think we spend too much time not feeling it, not grieving it, not sitting in it, not recognizing it, not naming it. And we stuff it and we numb it and we take away the opportunities of growth. And we also then, if we don't grieve it or see it or pull it out, we also add it to the backpack of our weights, right? The gift we do when this is called ambiguous loss, but the gift that we do when we recognize our ambiguous loss is that we no longer carry it on our backs. We've named it, we've talked about it, we've put it out in the world. Because in our society in America, we don't ritualize ambiguous. We ritualize loss of death. We ritualize some things. But yeah, I want to be a champion of a little bit better ritualizing and naming and talking about ambiguous loss. I said on my podcast a few weeks ago, nobody knows what to do with somebody who has lost the thing they never had.
Yeah.
So the loss of not having a husband and a family, we don't talk about that. I carry that loss. That is a wound in my soul. For you to love me deeply and to get to know me, I need to be able to talk about that wound, just like I need to be able to talk about my brother that died when I was 19 in a tragic drowning accident. Those are different wounds. We see them as different wounds. I see them as just like a whole part of a person.
Kylee, I love everything you're saying so much. And I've been thinking as you've been talking that your presence in the world and you representing some countercultural ideas in more than one way is increasing people's agency and access to their agency by allowing them to see a breadth of choices, that it is possible to be happy in this different space with these different things, that it is possible to approach life in a different way. And that if we're talking about the mission of trying to increase our agency in order to be able to increase the vibrancy of our lives, then you're giving us such a great gift.
So you probably teach this concept of ambiguous loss a lot in your practice, I imagine. But how would you just begin describing what ambiguous loss is?
I'm a big fan of calling out and talking about grief. And so I would sit with lots of my parents and they didn't know how to name it or even talk about it. And I would name these unspeakable things and I would say, this is grief and you need to grieve it. And I knew about ambiguous loss. There's a great book that I have that I read. And I kind of like, I've always been really interested in thanatology, which is the study of death and grieving. In fact, at one point I wanted to like maybe become a death doula, which not a lot of people know about, but it's the end of life versus the coming into life. Not everybody can sit with people in this kind of spaces, right? And I'm attracted to this kind of spaces. But one of the things that and probably in the last 10 years, one of the things that I started noticing, because I have named a bunch of my other grief. I've had multiple deaths in my life at a young age. So I've had this loss of life. I've had loss of dreams. I've had loss of love. One of my favorite books that talks about this is Making Loss Matter by Rabbi David Wolpe. He talks about these different losses. And I love this book because we don't name these losses as much. But the one area that many people don't talk about, even when they're focusing on grief, is this. It's because it is actually like really ambiguous. Now, when we're getting down to the brass tacks, usually ambiguous loss is when you're talking about a physical loss versus a psychological loss. So like if somebody got kidnapped, parents have ambiguous loss because they don't know what happened. If they never find them, did they die? Are they living somewhere? Does this make sense? The opposite side of that is somebody who's living that has dementia. They're still physically with you, but they're emotionally or mentally gone. So you're experiencing this ambiguous loss. I'm pretty passionate about talking specifically about ambiguous loss being single, but also just the idea of ambiguous loss, because we put such a value on physical loss, right? Even we've gotten better in America about infant loss, like having a miscarriage. It didn't used to be, but we've put a lot more energy and voice, and there's a lot more organizations and things, and we're allowing people to grieve, and we're naming it. That has come a long way, even, right? I don't know if you guys know, but there used to be a time in the United States where if you had a stillborn baby, they couldn't get a birth certificate because they didn't breathe. And there was a whole thing about like, let's not do that. So I think most of the states in the United States now you get a birth certificate. But so there's this like energy, there's fields, there's people on loss of life, right? We ritualize it in burial, and we ritualize it in coming back to someone's grave, even though we know in our spiritual belief that's not where they are, right? And I started to think a lot about that in the last 10 years. And I'm like, we don't have rituals for the loss of things that you physically don't have. And we don't have cyclical, we don't come back, and we don't have, I talked about this on my podcast. I bought a house and signed it in with tears streaming down my face. And the people around me were just like, this is supposed to be a happy moment. What they didn't know is that I never wanted to buy a house by myself. And even though I was doing this big accomplishment in my life, and I told myself I was going to buy a house by the time I was 40, and I did it, I just was wrestling because I was like, I wanted a partner and I wanted to share. And I was okay to cry while I was like having joy. I've sat on Mother's Days in the church pew, tears streaming down my face because I love mothers and I value my mom, but I wanted to be a mom so badly. And there's not a ritual for that. There's not a marking for that. There's not a group for that. There's not a space for that. I don't know. I want to make that different, but hopefully that helps you with to identify what ambiguous loss is. If the tears aren't streaming down my face for someone to say what's wrong with you, they don't know. And how do I talk about it without it seeming like it's a burden, or without somebody trying to fix me? The thing that I've learned the most about ambiguous loss is that people don't like to hold messy, painful things, especially if there's not something tangible, right? We don't like to go to funerals, but we go, but when I say to somebody, the deepest wound right now is that I will not bear children.
Yeah.
They Brene Brown silver lining it, but at least you guys know all these words because I know you know this.
Yes.
I know this. I'm intellectually smart. I know that I have a great body and a womb. I know that I can adopt. I know that I can be a stepmom. I know I don't need you to say any of that. I need you to sit in my moment, and I need you to hold it. And I don't even need you to even validate it. I just need it to be real and seen. And I need you to understand that it is as valid, as this other physical loss, but it feels a little bit like screaming into the void. I'll stop and let you guys thoughts.
I just feel that on so many levels. You made some comments earlier in our conversation about essentially developing a sense of resolve that you were going to tackle this chapter with all this energy. But what I've heard from you also is like the phases, they change. Like the doors slowly shut and now the ground feels a little different. You're looking ahead to possibly dating grandfathers. And right now you're looking at dating people who have kids. You're grieving this previous reality and trying to embrace this new one. To me, it's just like being able to name it is incredible, and being able to understand too that you're holding something that's very, very hard to hold. I mean, literally. I mean, it's literally hard. How do you put your hands around it? Like, how do
Mhm.
you? It's not just that it's heavy. It's like what is the shape? I can't even tell what this shape I'm holding is. And then also recognize that other people do also very much struggle to hold it. They might think of you as just like one of those petty, lonely spinsters, and it's like it's not that. It's a very difficult thing to get your hands around this.
I'm a little bit struck by a little paradox. So the idea of ambiguous loss being that there aren't like markers to like mourn this or think about what it means. There's nobody knows how to intervene. And yet that's like doubled on by the fact that actually people do sort of see your grief. And that's one of the most annoying things about being single is like people like are very quick to like wrap up your whole identity into one of grief and to project that onto you. And that's something I've constantly struggled with my parents, because like I'll have my own melancholy about stuff and then I talk to my parents, I'm like, well, you guys are actually way more stressed than I am, and I don't want to hold your pain about my pain, because
Yeah.
it's actually much heavier than mine. And so it's actually not a matter of there's no public acknowledgement. And in some ways, let's just be real. I actually don't know what I'm missing by not having kids. I
Mm.
I have a sense of it. I have a desire for that, but there is something like my parents who had 11, that's like the only kind of joy they can comprehend. They know much more intimately what I'm missing out on. And so anyway, I'm just kind of wondering about that. Like what exactly is this intense pain?
Thing that is I will tell you guys, if like there is a huge loss with me not having kids, and there is a huge like I need 8 or 9 hours of sleep every day for the rest of my life till I die because of my mental health stuff and because of my ADHD. And I was always very stressed about if I had a kid, how we were going to do it. We're going to have to do a lot of things to figure that out because I could not do the never sleeping and never end like cope. Right. So there's a lot of things that I didn't have to experience because I never had kids. And I have to hold that next to that. That's also like my truth
Mm,
and my ambiguous loss is that like maybe I'm a little bit relieved. These are some of those unspeakable
yeah.
Mm.
because we want to say the
Mm,
Oh,
story of
wow.
like, I want to have
yeah.
kids and I want to be married. I would be remiss if I didn't say as a therapist, I've seen the worst of relationships and couples and things. And I've seen my friends decide a relationship toxic, then be single. I'm just not, that's not
Mm.
me. Like a long time
Mm,
ago, I said, I'd rather be happy and single than in a toxic relationship. Some people might find that as selfish. Some people might find that as that's why you're not getting married, you know? And I just have decided that, like, I don't hate love. I love love. People ask me all the time, you're probably not married because you see how miserable it is. No, but I do know the reality of it. I do know that I have not magical think what having kids are. And I can still have ambiguous loss of grief that I'm not going to have it. But you're right. It's not the same as somebody, my parents who had a kid and lost a kid. I'll never have that. And we don't need to compare our griefs, right?
yeah.
So one of the things that is the hardest in my ambiguous loss is that I'm one of 8 kids. And my family, even though most of my family isn't members, my parents are on a mission right now in Africa. We talk to them every week. We've figured out in a really beautiful way how to be a family with lots of different beliefs. And we always want to come home. And my dad talks about his family. He's one of 9. And the story that we are weaving is so beautifully messy and broken and lovely. And I don't have that for my life moving forward. I don't have progeny and I don't have kids or kids that have siblings. Like now, I hope I get married and I have that and I'm a stepmom. But some of my ambiguous loss, it's the hardest that I can't hold on to, but that I know and feel. And that is the hardest part for me. And maybe why I push so hard in my life to create things that will bring legacy, like have a
Mm.
podcast, write a book. I have this push that says I need to produce to be noticed and seen and left. Because if I come into the world and I leave the world and I am not attached to anybody, am I untethered? And the answer is no. And you don't even have to produce like I feel like I have to do. But this is some of how I cope with that is like when I put things in the world or I give permission for people or I come on a podcast sort of present this dichotomy, it might help somebody else because I am not doing that as a mother. I'm not giving that to my daughter or my son, but I still have that in me. I still have this knowledge and this earned wisdom and this resiliency. And if it's not going there, I just think that it shouldn't just stop here. And that's equal parts exciting and equal parts just so
Yeah.
it's the door I don't want to open. Like
Yeah.
I want to be like my parents who have these kids who will take care of them the rest of their lives and have these stories. And like the story that I have right now is not, you know? And I said this once to my friend and she said, Kylee, you will never be alone because you will always create belonging places. I have this fear. The
Mm,
fear is that like
Mm.
I'll be alone forever. Right now it's doable because even though my friends are having kids that are graduating from high school, like I still can hang out with them and then but I'm working. What happens when I retire and I don't have my kids or my grandkids and my friends have and then my friend said, but that's not going to be your story because it's never been your story because you've always been able to figure out
Yeah.
how to make friends in whatever stage of your life.
I'm really struck by what you said about relief, and I actually feel exactly the same, exactly what you said. When I was, like, 22, I could get by with 4 hours of sleep and be, like, fine, and now I'm like, if I don't sleep well, I am in like, it's like 0 to 100 insane, like, for me, and I have
Totally.
wondered a lot about that, like and that's just been an age thing, like, I just need sleep more as I've aged, and so part of me is like, "Yeah, that would be a perk if I don't ever have to go through a totally crazy phase for many years of sleepless nights with kids." Which just leads me to this question of like, how about ambiguous joy? Is that something that you relate to? And then a second question related is I think I'm realizing on one hand, there is this sense of like righteous desires, of course, wanting partnership, wanting love, wanting romance, wanting these things. Sometimes we also feel pressured to say that because I think it gives us a kind of fig leaf of some kind to like, as long as we can make sure that our desires are righteous, then we can feel like we're off the hook. And I think that that factors into this whole shame cycle that we so often feel like, what am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? And yet, I think one of the things that is worth deconstructing there is I think there actually are multiple righteous desires. And the three Nephites, for example, I think that's like a big, that's like one of the token places where it's kind of like, whoa, what if actually people can want certain things? What some people are like, I want to go straight to you in heaven, Jesus. And other people are like, I actually kind of enjoying this life thing. I want to keep doing this and serving for, that story is such an interesting thing. And I'm curious why we feel so much pressure to be like, "Oh, my desires are so righteous." My parents always say that to me too. And sometimes I'm like, "I guess so, but also I don't think you actually know my desires." And like this
Mm.
again relates I'm channeling some of our prior conversations, but we could be married if we wanted to. We probably could.
Yeah.
As you were saying, you've chosen you would rather be single than in a toxic relationship. And I think we've mentioned we would all rather probably be in one that helps us grow and expand than one that requires us to shrink.
Mm.
And when that's the question, are we kind of like muddying the waters about what's actually going wrong when we're like, oh, I have these righteous desires? Anyway, it's just something to think about. Like, why do we always feel like we need to like play up that idea? I don't know. Maybe it's like distracting from the more interesting and also righteous ideas,
I love this.
desires that we might actually have about
Yeah.
how we want to be in the world. And I love that you keep talking about building the kingdom. Like I feel that from your spirit that you have such an energy about like wanting to do good and wanting to like feel some kind of meaningful friction with your reality and your world and like do stuff. That is so righteous and good. Why do we always feel pressured to be like, but I really did just want to have babies, which is also a good
Mm.
desire. But it's just like the landscape of our righteous desires is much more complex than that, I guess is what I'm saying. Okay, so that was a comment on a question, sorry.
No,
But
Mal,
Love that. Love
jeez.
that.
and then
So
my
good.
third question is like I relate to so much to your idea that of like, okay, if I'm not going to have progeny, I need to leave a legacy in another way. And yet there's always a part of me that's like, so often we feel like in this space of not having kids, we have to compensate with some tangible project. And sometimes I'm like, that's such a cruel thing to do to ourselves. Also, it just struck me. My grandfather had 10 kids. He has uh close to 100 grandchildren and over 200 great grandchildren at this point. But like in the last month where I arm him into going into a care center. He has so many kids in the area, so many grandkids, like so many people who love him. You can't imagine like a higher just sheer number of people. And he still ended up in a care center in a way
Mm.
like basically he is dying in a way that is far lonelier than it should have been, which really struck me with this we always think that we can really just shore up the resources, the human resources, get as like, oh, my kids will take care of me when I'm old. Wow, you can't imagine somebody who had more progeny this in this day and age, and he still ended up in that icky situation where people are like, grandpa's a burden. Oh my gosh, it just broke my heart. But it's just like sometimes I wonder if that desire for a legacy is a little bit distracting us from like, oh my gosh, just the reality of how lonely it is to live a life. Like and
Truly.
and that there's not really ever a number of kids you can have or like an amount of success you can have in your career that's gonna compensate that's gonna like really scratch that itch. It's like I wonder I feel the same impulse of like, what can I do with my time that like gives me a story that I'm like, I haven't wasted it and I'm gonna be okay and I'm gonna have a bright future. And it's like maybe I just need to be more be okay with the kind of thing that life is. Like realize there's not ever an amount of accumulated stuff that's going to like fundamentally change the conditions of life. But I'm wondering about that idea of legacy and whether that can sometimes like put us in this mindset of needing to like just fill space with stuff.
Oh man, I have so many thoughts. First, the ambiguous joy thing. I don't know if this is the right answer to that question, but if the kind of right track would be completely unexpected delights that you never thought were possible in your like the path that you didn't picture for yourself. Absolutely. Like absolutely. I feel a sort of measure of weird gratitude and almost guilt for how much I love my current life sometimes because
Hmm.
I live with 4 roommates. I It's like incredible sort of people in their late 20s, early 30s, like sorority/WeWork slash WeWork experience in a city full of weirdos on a path that like I can have like a creative conversation with anybody anywhere because I'm in LA. It's just a bunch of people like me who are on the Don
Don
Quixote type
Quixote.
like
Yeah.
journeys where like you have no idea if like where you're going exactly. And I feel so blessed to be in this strange wilderness with all of these other weary travelers. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. And I think I'm meant to be here. And it is extremely joyous. And even in the moments of like extreme, almost like desert or desolation, like it feels like everything's dead, like the tree has no leaves on it. I'm struck by the beauty of nothing and like what else there is underneath nothing. And to your last point, if my concern is dying alone or my concern is how much this hurts, often I start asking really interesting questions like, wait, is this bad? Is this even pain? If I'm in pain, is it because of me? Like, could I actually make this hurt less by believing something different or by knowing more or by loving more or by showing more kindness to something or someone or myself?
My ambiguous joy, there hasn't been a day in almost 6 years that I don't come home to my house and think, "Ugh,
Mm,
I have a purple mattress and I have
mhm,
a Maloof bed that like an adjustable bed, and I couldn't love going to sleep by myself because I probably snore, and if I'm married to somebody, they're gonna snore, and I sleep in on the weekends at nobody's schedule but mine. I
yeah.
eat when I want to eat and I don't have to feed people 3 times a day. Oh, that just like the idea of that is the worst thing that of any relationship and having kids. Like I've admitted that a million times. Thinking of the exhaustion that it would take to like feed people. So yeah, I sometimes feed my loss with my ambiguous joy. My friend who's a grief counselor said, be really careful that you don't that this is part of the really grieving, right? That you don't berate your loss with the joys. So I
Hmm.
try to hold them. I try to hold them. Sometimes I try to hold them separately. I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes when I'm really having a hard time, I look around and I'm like, I have a lot to be grateful for. First
Yeah.
world
Hmm.
problems. I have a job, I have a house, I have a car, I have a family who loves me. Like I said, I'm never being hungry. And then pain is relative. And I say, Kylie, you are okay to be sad, to have loss, to have grief. And you are okay to be filled and complete and joy without your righteous desires. This is that other side of the
Mm,
unspeakable things, right? What would people say of me if I told them, like, I feel like I lack for nothing?
Mhm.
Because we have a trope that says you have to be in pain and sad if you don't have your righteous desires, right?
Right.
And I don't
right.
think everything about life is being joyful. Like I do not live like we're all about being happy. But I need to be a steward of the one life that I have. And so right now my one life that I have is single. And so I feel this, I do feel an urgency. I've always felt an urgency. And when I say build the kingdom, it's like where my strengths, where the things that I can do better than the average other people, right? And I want to blow wind in other people's cells too. Where's the thing that you can stand up in? And where's the thing that you can create? And how do you bring people into that? I now feel a sense of challenge to really marinate in ambiguous joy. Try to see what that is and maybe talk about that more
Yeah.
in the future. I love that. So thank you for that invitation. But yeah, I am equal parts sometimes sad and deliriously happy that I've created a world that sees me that I can fall back on.
Yeah. I think joy can be painful sometimes. A lot of the times our emotions come secondhand from some kind of story that we're telling. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I finally won this thing, or I lost this thing and my story's going wrong. And when we're really joyful, one of the scary, weird things about it is like we're actually just living life and absorbed in the flow of it and not thinking too much about ourselves. But that can be disorienting because, you want it to be grippy. But I think joy is just as slippery as anything else. It comes when we're in that like flow state with life and actually not thinking that much about ourselves.
We sort
And
of have this
this
feeling we have
is
to
my
always be
theory.
reaching. We have to always be growing and reaching. Yeah, sometimes I tell myself, Kylee, you're fine. You worked really hard to get here. Just enjoy it. Be where you are. Be content. You don't always have to be reaching and growing and striving. And yeah.
Thank you
love
so
you
much,
so
Kylie.
much. Really,
Yeah.
Please
I'm
stay
so
friends.
grateful.
Thank you for listening, everyone. If you would like to continue the conversation with us, we invite you to subscribe to our Substack. You can find us at thesoloist.substack.com. That will allow you to get an email in your inbox every time we release a new episode, and you can click just directly on the links to the readings and the things that we're watching, reading, and thinking about. It also allows for easy two-way conversation with us. Hearing from you all is honestly the best part. No matter how cliche it is, I know every podcast says that, but it's really true. So please subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.